Welcome to the Cross Border Interview Podcast, a podcast about getting out from behind the keyboard and just talking. Each week, we invite a guest or two to sit down and talk about their life and their work. I'm Christopher Brown, your host, and this is the Cross Border Interview Podcast featuring
Dean Del Mastro, former member of Parliament for Peterborough Riding.
First off, I want to thank you so much for doing this. Greatly appreciate it. Today's guest is the former MP for Peterborough, Mr. Dean Del Mastro. Dean, I want to thank you so much for doing this today.
Yeah, it's a real pleasure.
My first question to all my guests is, where did your sense of duty come from?
That's interesting. I guess, even from when I was a young kid, my parents had been involved in volunteer positions and so forth on political campaigns, always liberal campaigns, but political campaigns. So I had been around them, I guess, from a young age, and it really didn't matter, municipal, provincial, federal. They were real advocates in participating in democracy, and I guess it just kind of I caught the bug, if you will, from them.
Do you remember that first campaign that you worked on or you helped out on with your parents?
Yeah, as a matter of fact, I remember would have been probably the first one I really have a significant memory of would have been the 1987 Ontario campaign, where my parents had taken an active role in supporting the candidate for Peterborough, who later would become the federal MP, was Peter Adams. He was a professor at Trent University. My mother had worked at Trent University for a number of years at that time, and they had got behind that campaign, and that was kind of the first one I was, that I really had any kind of involvement with.
And did you envision yourself being political for your entire life with your parents, or was it something that, because for me, what my parents did, I always wanted to do the exact opposite. So if they were involved in politics, I got as far away from politics as possible.
So, no, I think, so in the 1990 provincial campaign, I'm almost ashamed to acknowledge in Ontario, I never voted. And I was a university student at the time, and it just didn't seem relevant to what we were doing. And we kind of woke up one morning to find out that Bob Rae had won the provincial election. And I thought,
I think everyone in Ontario said that.
How in the world can this happen, right? So it was kind of I thought, I can't sit by and watch that happen again. And then the next campaign that came up was the federal election of 93. And the local candidate when I was in Windsor was Herb Gray, and I worked to get students out in support of Herb Gray in '93. I was a fervent supporter of the Chrétien Liberals at the time. It was how I grew up. Everybody in my family, it was kind of a learned behavior, and it's funny. I think that was more common years ago, where you kind of grew up in a family, and if your grandparents and your parents and, people at your church and so forth that always voted a certain way, you just did, right? I don't know that is, I don't know that that's, you could say the same today, but there was a lot of brand power in politics at the time, and policies seemed to be something separate. So I grew up, and all of my influence and so forth pointed me towards a Liberal Party. And it wasn't until, I guess, the 95 provincial campaign when, following the Bob Rae government, Mike Harrison came along, and that was the common sense revolution. And I started to reevaluate some of how my own beliefs were lining up with party platforms. And that kind of started me down the path of looking at where the Liberal Party was going versus what I kind of believed and stood for. So I did assist the Peterborough provincial campaign in '95, and kind of stayed on. I was active in every campaign from then on.
Under the Progressive Conservatives in provincial.
And then through Canadian Alliance, I went and saw, I'm going to say it was in maybe '97. I went and saw Preston Manning speak, came to Peterborough. I didn't think that he had an entire or holistic vision for Canada. But the areas that he hit on, when he talked about the Charter of Rights and Freedoms, but he mentioned that there wasn't an accompanying charter of responsibilities. And I thought, well, this really does make sense. How can we have rights without responsibilities, right? And I still think that's something that we haven't addressed. What is our responsibility to each other as citizens and so forth? So those sorts of notions really spoke to me, and they were things that I thought were worth fighting for.
The call for politics is one that only a few people seem to have. And when they decide to get into politics, it's for their own reason. In 2006, you decided to put your name on a ballot and you decided to run in your home riding of Peterborough. What was that decision like? Was it hard or was it easy? Because at that time, Peter Adams, the incumbent, was just announcing his retirement, if I'm not mistaken, and then you announced that you were running. So was it that catalyst of him actually announcing that he was going to retire that you said, you know what, it's my time to put my name in the ring?
So I had volunteered in the 2004 federal Conservative campaign here in Peterborough, and we were really convinced that we were going to win. James Jackson was our candidate. He was a good man. And we really thought that we had an excellent shot of winning Peterborough. And then it didn't happen. Having been involved and around that campaign, I had some ideas as to why it didn't happen. It wasn't, in my view, it wasn't that the support wasn't there, it's the trust wasn't there. People looked at it and thought, yeah, we probably do need to change. They weren't necessarily thrilled with the direction of government or the direction of the country. But they just didn't trust the other parties were an appropriate avenue for change, right? Trust is a big thing when it comes to voting. And I looked at the candidates that were running for the Federal Conservative Party, and they were all good people. All the people that had stepped up were good people. Many of them became friends of mine. But I just looked at it and thought, I don't think they can win. I was the last candidate to step up, put my name forward. I did what I normally do, which is, if I decide that I'm determined on something, I put everything I've got into it. And we won the nomination in Peterborough. I think it was on the 6th ballot by 7 votes. I never trailed, but the whole idea of a preferential ballot wasn't something I really understood. And the idea of telling people to mark me as their second choice or third choice, I just was telling people, I hope I'm your first choice, and kind of got schooled a little bit by people that understood the system better. But we wound up, despite everything, we wound up winning on the last ballot, and won the 2006 election, which was a 56-day marathon and a bit of a 3-way split. I think I won by 2,222 votes, which is easy to remember, and really never looked back. I've been fortunate in the elections that I've ran, and I've always found the support of the people. I've never lost, so I don't know that I don't know that experience in elections. But I've always been determined, just like I guess it's a bit of a sports mentality. I've always been determined that if I'm going to compete, I'm going to do my very best. And when given the opportunity, as I said in my final address to Parliament, I was given an opportunity, and I thought it was my job to make the very most of that opportunity, and I did. I left nothing on the field.
Going back to that 2006 campaign, politicians or candidates to be elected officials usually have an issue that they see that the government of the time is dropping the ball on. It's particularly in their riding. What was that issue for you? You say you thought the other candidates in the nomination contest for the Conservative candidacy weren't up to the job, but what was the issue that you said, you know what, if I win, this is the issue I'm going to address?
I wouldn't say they weren't up to the job. I just didn't think they could win.
I apologize.
That's a different issue. But I think that for me, I had been in business in Peterborough for a number of years. And the reason why I was in business is because there weren't any jobs. There was no jobs for people with my education. And most of my friends that I went to university with were working in the GTA, and that was people that, including people from Peterborough, that just weren't able to come back here to work. And Peterborough was almost a legendary manufacturing community. We had GE, Outboard Marine, West Clocks, Quaker Oats, which is still here, Coca-Cola manufacturers, all the Minute Maid juice products here. But that was dying. And there really didn't seem to be anybody stepping forward with a vision for how are we going to build the next generation of people from Peterborough that could succeed here, because other generations had found tremendous success here, and it's a great community. It's a wonderful place to live. We're right on the edge of a beautiful natural backdrop here with the Trent Severn Waterway and all the Kawartha Lakes. And it's a tremendous quality of life, but people have to be able to earn a living. And what I saw was too many people had either determined that they just couldn't make a living here, and that was a lot of my friends, or they were taking a substantial discount on what their true value was in the workforce just to be here. I didn't think that was right. And what I saw and what I really went to work on addressing was our infrastructure deficit here. Everything from internet infrastructure, which was non-existent in a lot of the rural parts of the riding. Now, when I say rural, it's not rural like Northern Ontario. I mean, yes, we have farms and countryside, but it's also close to major centers, and it shouldn't be that difficult. But I had parts of the riding that were still on party lines. And, you say that to young people, and they don't even really understand what a party line is. But they didn't have their own, they couldn't even get dial-up internet because they didn't have their own phone line and cell phones. Like, there's still areas in the riding, despite my best efforts, where, cell phones, you drive into a black abyss and they don't work. So we had to address that. We were a nice community at the end of a 4-lane highway, so we had become a cul-de-sac and an afterthought for companies that were looking to invest. So I wrote reports calling for an investment into the airport. We've now got Canada's busiest small airport in the country is now Peterborough, which is really driving a tremendous economy. Seneca's Flight School moved here, for example, which has really been Flying Colors has grown in leaps and bounds. So that investment that I fought for into the airport has really changed the dynamics of this community's economy. Highway 407, which was a big issue here in Ontario. We needed that second 4-lane highway in Ontario, but it was never going to come all the way through and connect to my highway, which actually extends all the way to the nation's capital in Ottawa. And I thought, if that bypasses us, we're going to remain bypassed. And the provincial government had it at the time. They had an act called the Places to Grow Act. And the Places to Grow Act was, for Peterborough, it was anything but. And I looked at it and said, well, for the next 30 years, you're not going to grow. Yeah. And I looked at it and thought, well, if we don't grow, then we're going to die. I mean, you can't, there's no such thing as standing still. You either move forward and you grow and you meet the challenges of tomorrow, or you fall behind and you continue to fall behind. And that, to me, wasn't the future that I saw for Peterborough. And more broadly, I looked at a scandal-plagued government that had lost its way, that I didn't think had a vision for the future of Canada, or had a vision for Canada that, in my view, was either too backward-looking or too small. And I see Canada as a country, and I firmly believe this now, that Canada is a country that can stand out on the world stage, that can lead. And I believe that on so many things in my time in government, we really did. And we punched above our weight. I'm proud of that.
That 2006 campaign, was it hard for you to see your name on that ballot for the first time when you went into the actual voting booth and you got to put the X beside your name? When I talk to candidates, they say it was the most surreal situation of their life to see their name, because you expect you're going to get your vote, and then you see all these other votes come in for you.
It's kind of terrifying, to be honest with you, because, see, I was in business in Peterborough, and even though I had volunteered in campaigns and so forth, I mean, politics really is divisive. And even though I was always a person that thrived in building friendships and relationships, and I get along with everybody. And I've always wanted to be, and in politics, I had to get over this because I always wanted to be liked, and I had to deal with this. Like in high school, I was always the person that tried to be friends with everyone. I kind of, when you get into politics, you have to accept that sometimes people don't know you. They've maybe never even heard anything you've had to say on a given subject, but they've already decided they don't like you. And that's hard. And when your name starts to go up on election signs, on lawns, and your family's in business in town, and your name is also on that business, and the phone starts ringing saying, people voicing their displeasures with something, that's hard. And getting in there and actual election day is terrifying. When you go in to put your name on the ballot, you just sit there, you're powerless. There's nothing else you can do. You're just waiting for the numbers to be counted. And it's not like anything else that I've ever experienced. And what I will say is, people run for different reasons. For me, it was never about me. I was employed. I was doing well in life, business. I'd been married when my first election came around. I'd been married already for a decade. We were kind of on a path, and it never included running for politics. And I just kind of went to my wife one day and said, I think I'm going to run. She looked at it, she thought about it for a second and thought, well, yeah, I think you're kind of made for this, right? And that was it. And we never really, but she told me, like, if you're going to do it, you're going to put everything into it because, we're not running to lose, right? And that was it. But it's, I have the utmost respect for anybody that, that puts their name on a ballot, puts their heart into an election, because I know how difficult that is. And I know how it cuts. It cuts even within families, right? And even within friendship groups, right? Like your friends will look at you and say, wow, you're running really for them, right? And it's like, yeah, well, that's kind of, then you get into these philosophical discussions about what you believe versus what they believe. And you find out, wow, I realize, but the other thing that you realize, and this is really something that's missing in public debate and discussions today, which is that ultimately most people have the same end goals, right? We may disagree about how we get there. And what I used to say to people all the time, and I found it disarming, and kind of the basis for a good conversation on any given subject. I would always take meetings with people that perhaps disagreed with me or were trying to sway my vote on something. And I would say, we disagree on this issue, but there will be other issues in the future we agree on. And there's no reason for us, just because we happen to disagree on this, to leave this room or to part thinking less of each other. I respect your position, and I hope you respect mine. And there just isn't enough of that today. I think a lot of people outside of Peterborough or people listening to this interview may look at it and say, I'm surprised to hear that coming from Del Mastro. But the reality is, the job I was asked to do or relied upon to do in Ottawa, which was largely to carry water for, whatever was threatening the government on any given day. Some people would describe it as defending the indefensible, was largely pitted you or pushed you into a very partisan mindset, a very partisan direction. You've got forces trying to tear the government down. My job was to build the government up and defend it. But within the riding and to my constituents, I had a very different identity, which was somebody that worked hard for the community. I always took meetings. I volunteered on behalf of virtually every charity that there was, and supported them, and really tried to inspire young people whenever I had the opportunity, not just to take part in democracy, but to believe in whatever dream they had, whatever really drove them, whatever they were passionate about, to really pursue those things, and that they're possible.
Why do you think politics is so divided today? Because you talk about how in 2006 it wasn't as divided as it is today. So, what is your opinion on why we are such a divided political realm than 10 years ago, 5 years ago?
Well, it's interesting. As social media has kind of developed and the 24-hour news cycle has kind of developed, these became very powerful communications tools, and they could have been used, or perhaps maybe many would argue that maybe they should have been used as a greater public forum whereby many views would be heard and absorbed and listened to. And instead, what they kind of become is echo chambers, right? And you've got all these enclaves within social media and within even within conventional media now, where there isn't a lot of sharing of ideas between people that have given positions on subjects, and even less cross-party agreement and cooperation. And I think that successive governments actually in Ottawa have responsibility for that. We didn't work as well across the aisle as we could have or should have, especially after the 2011 election when we won the majority government. We could have been a lot more magnanimous about it, right? We could have extended that olive branch to the opposition. And I think, if we made, and we made mistakes, but if we made any major mistakes in terms of the tenor of debate in the country, I would say it really occurred after that 2011 election, where after two successive minority parliaments, which were divisive, we had an opportunity to be more magnanimous than we were, to be more uniting than we were. And instead, we continued to fight an election, even though there wasn't going to be one for 4 years. And I think in minority parliaments, we have that now in Canada. You've kind of got that ongoing election mentality whereby at any given point, you kind of look at it and think, I might have to go to voters, and I've always got to be defending my flank. We didn't have that after 2011, and it was an opportunity to turn the temperature down, and we didn't. I also think it's fed, it's fed from what we see to the south of us in the U.S. We've really got to work to try and avoid, what we see occurring elsewhere. And we've got a failure or almost a collapse of conventional media and newspapers and so forth, print advertising. It's really changed how people consume their news. And social media, as I said, rather than becoming this forum where everybody kind of talks or listens to each other, it's really become a forum where people viciously attack. Like the tenor on social media is always shocking to me. How nasty and vicious and cruel people can be on social media, but also how they tend to talk to each other and tend to pat each other on the back for having the same idea versus listening to other people. And the great centers of thought and development of policy and so forth are secondary or post-secondary schools and graduate schools and so forth have really became I think that is, people are less and less encouraged to stand out there and more encouraged to be part of a, what's thought to be socially acceptable or politically acceptable. And I think, when we really celebrate a diversity of voices or ideas, and realize that, somebody that doesn't think exactly like me or see solutions exactly the way I do doesn't make them a bad person. It makes them different from me. And they're not my enemy. And they may have some good ideas and maybe I'm not right all the time, but less and less we see people being able to acknowledge that. Working with other parties or members of other parties is seen as weakness. It's even suggested as weakness in the media, and it's too bad.
Well, I find like you said, with the rise of social media, with the rise of politics, of the divisive politics down in the South, people don't even want to have a conversation now. They want to sit behind their keyboard and hit out 20 characters or 120 characters on Twitter, and then that's it. That's their contribution to the political conversation, where I think even, like you said, in a minority government, which Harper had in 2006 and 2008, we were talking to each other still, right? It was that talking. And then we saw the rise of the far right down the South, and it sort of started creeping up here. Not saying that the Conservative Party was far right up here, but it divides personalities, especially in Canadian population, where you don't want to talk to the Liberals, or you don't want to talk to the NDP or the Bloc or the Greens or the Conservatives, because, like you said, it would be seen as too weak. And it's a shame that that's where we've gotten as a society.
Yeah, I think we have issues. You can't deny that there's issues that divide people, right? There's issues, whether they're social issues or economic issues or what have you. There are issues where people are simply not going to agree. They're not going to coalesce around it, right? You try to find common ground, or you work for common ground on them, and you try to, you do your best to address the middle. And, the outliers, what people now call the extreme right or left, well, you realize that they're probably not going to get what they want. Yeah. Right. But that's okay. Right. That's how a democracy works. I think that we had and one of the things I was very proud of, I think Canada had in 2010, we had came through the Great Recession, which was prompted by, the real estate defaults in the U.S. And we came through it kind of shining colors. And we hosted the 2010 Vancouver Olympics. And I remember that time as being perhaps the most united I had ever seen Canada, the most proud and patriotic I had ever seen our country. I think people broadly of all ideologies and political persuasions, the one thing we could agree on is that our country was great, and we were really united from coast to coast. There was very little support for sovereignty in Quebec. It had basically been completely extinguished. And that was confirmed in the 2011 election when the Bloc was wiped out. And I think that, despite some of our differences, we had also coalesced around a bunch of values and ideas and concepts and identities that I think galvanized Canadians. And really, we had an identity. And I don't really know how, I guess it's difficult to say how exactly we lost that. I think some of the things that have occurred, whether it's the emergence of the cancel culture, the permanent kind of obstruction and opposition that we've seen on all sides, that's really entrenched people, the echo chambers that people are living in, which is encouraging people to the extremes on the right and left, right? So if you're never talking to people from the other side, it's really hard to find middle ground, right? And it's pulling people to the extremes of right and left orthodoxies. And I think that's it's a challenge, because it's in some ways some of the concepts and so forth, they can be they can draw people in, and it's very easy to see people drawn in, and we've got a loss of we really do have a loss of faith in a lot of the media, which is which I think they've got to work to get that trust back, and they can't get wrapped up in the politics of the day. They've got to be objective, and the notion that that we have we may have a media that doesn't at all time call balls and strikes in their reporting. The way that they're coming in, I think, is and both sides feel that way, right? The left feels that we've got a right-wing media. The right feels we've got a left-wing media. And so people probably say, well, they're doing their job then. But it's not really, it's not really playing out that way. I think that, I think that in order to kind of bridge the divide, it's going to take a couple of things. And I think one of the things that we've got to do is go back to revisiting kind of how did we get here, and how do we move forward? As I've said earlier, minority politics are by their very nature divisive. But the one thing that, you'd love to see all parties come out and acknowledge is that, we're all in this together, right? Whatever outcome we manage or fail to manage, we'll either share in the success or share in the failure. And if you start on it from that point, you should be able to drive some solutions. And it really does require people to take down the temperature. And it doesn't mean that governments aren't going to be held to account. It doesn't mean that scandals aren't going to be covered and successes aren't going to be celebrated. It just means that you have to see people as people and not impugn every one of their motivations as being selfish or ideologically driven. I think democratic reform is critical, and how we look at democratic reform in Canada, I think really matters. I believe that the way things have evolved now in Canadian politics, you're talking to a person that actually served in the Prime Minister's office. So much power and I don't believe this was intended, but so much power is concentrated in the hands of so few in our government. And they have ability that they don't have, like that the U.S. president, for example, doesn't have. The British Prime Minister doesn't have. The Prime Minister in Canada and the Prime Minister's office commands a tremendous amount of power by virtue of the fact that votes are whipped. Individual members have really had a lot of their power and ability and sway stripped from them. We see parties stripping people of their booting them out of caucus and nomination. But we have parties that won't even allow, and it's kind of encouraged by the media, whereby they're saying, how can you allow this candidate to run for you? But the very essence of a democracy is that people, the voters, should be able to pick who, and if anybody bears a responsibility for somebody being nominated that isn't appropriate for the job, it's the voters. So if you want to hold voters responsible for who they nominate or elect, I guess that's okay. But it is a democracy. We should respect the will of voters, and instead we're further driving this concentration of power into the leaders' hands and the leaders' offices for all the parties by saying, you need to disqualify this candidate. You need to boot this person in office. You need to, if somebody votes either with the government or against the government, an opposition party, if they vote against a party line whip, this should not be an issue of leadership in a party. It's somebody that has been elected by a group of constituents that feels it's their obligation to vote one way or another to reflect the views of their constituents. And unfortunately, the way that things have evolved in Canada has just become such a concentration of power in offices. And to me, the best way to do that is to take a look. We've got to take a look at the party system and say the party system itself is what's failing Canadians. That's what's driving us. If I ran for politics tomorrow and I got up on a stage in front of just a group of complete cross-section of voters, and I spoke about 10 issues and people looked at it and said, you know what, I really agree with him on 8 or 9 or all 10 issues. Yeah. And then I said, by the way, I'm really excited to be running for the Liberal Party of Canada. 60% of the people there would immediately say, well, I might have agreed with him, but I'm never voting for him. Well, okay, but see, this is what's driving us apart. Or if I said I was running for the Conservative Party, you'd get the same reaction, right? So if we actually go back to it and say, okay, we're going to vote based on ideas, principles, values, initiatives, vision, these sorts of things that would actually bring groups of voters together that may not have the exact ideology. You could have somebody that, that's really climate conscious and somebody that looks at it and feels that, the economy and their job and kitchen table issues are what's going to drive their votes. You could have those people coalesce on ideas and principles and strategies and so forth versus the way that we're doing it now. And, it would be really interesting if a federal budget was being voted on. It didn't necessarily result in the fall of a government
Yeah.
if it didn't pass. And they actually had to negotiate with given MPs. We're always put in a position, and when I say we're, I guess I'm going back a bit, but MPs are always put in a position of all or nothing, right? And this is the problem with omnibus legislation, right? You're always put in this position where, there's 10 things there that you like, there's 5 things you don't like or you don't think have anything to do with the bill, but they come to you and say, we're voting in favor of it, or we're voting against it. And you look at it and think, well, it's not really a yes or no question, but you wind up with a yes or no option. And sometimes the consequences of that yes or no, ask Brent Rathgaber in Alberta, the consequences of that yes, no can be catastrophic to your political career, right? And he took a principled position on his bill, which dealt with access to information largely, and being more transparent with Canadians, didn't have the support of the party, and he followed that right down to its end, which was he couldn't be a part of the party anymore. Well, why? Why does that happen, right? And we've seen that with the current government too, whereby we had government ministers forced to step down from their positions and ran as independents. Why? Because they ran afoul of the prime minister, but maybe they were running, and certainly you could make this argument because they weren't all defeated in the next election.
Yeah.
Maybe they were running consistent with what the voters were hoping for or wanted or needed. And maybe they were being ethical, and maybe they were actually holding up a standard that Canadians would like all of their elected officials to. So it doesn't fit within the party system. And that's where I would start democratic reforms in Canada. And if we do that, and if we do it right, I think you'll see less of this push to the outer limits of political ideology, and you'll see more people brought back into a larger tent, which is, which I think would both be healing and constructive for the country. And if it were up to me, I would say, let's get the Prime Minister and the executive out of the House of Commons, right? Let's not have them voting on their own legislation, because it's, let's have the House of Commons as a place where there's real debate, real discussions on bills, real discussions on solutions, not something that's foisted upon them by the government minister or the well-intended bureaucrats that write most of the legislation. Right? Let's have those debates by the people that are elected to have them, and let's be very transparent about it, and let's not have people under so much pressure to follow a party line that to the extent where MPs don't write speeches. I'm sure people are well aware of this, that half of the speeches given on the floor of the House of Commons are handed to the members and they just go in and read them. What is the point of that? Like it's like it's a phony exercise, right? Like, let's hear your own thoughts. Let's hear what your constituents are saying. And the only way to do that is to remove the overpowering influence and pressure of the party system that we've got right now. So I think there's a better vision for that. I think, as I said, if you remove the Prime Minister and the executive out of the House of Commons and it operated as a chamber whereby confidence in the current government, people could even vote at that point for the person that they believe would be best suited to be Prime Minister. And they might even run with a given executive. So who's your finance minister going to be, or like the idea that these are the top executive positions in the country, and they are, but we aren't necessarily putting people in with executive experience. You might see different people run and different outcomes, and you might get to a better place. As I said, I believe it would encourage people to come in from the fringes and to reunite under a larger Canadian tent.
One thing that I find that most Canadians who I talk to have an issue with politicians is when they give a speech in the House of Commons, they're looking for the 10-second soundbite that's going to be on the news that night. They're not looking for what their constituents want. They're looking to make the news so they can get a higher profile, so they can potentially get a cabinet position or a parliamentary assistant or move up in the ranks from the backbench. Did you find that was the case during your time in politics?
So the incentives within the current construct are to, if you're trying to work your way up in the House of Commons, if you're trying to get a better position, better committee assignments and so forth, the incentives are always to follow the leader's office. I don't care what party you're in. It's not to carve your own path. That's for sure. Ask Garth Turner about that. I think that that 10-second soundbite is because, we typically speaking, most people are so busy in their everyday lives that they consume very small amounts of federal politics. So if you come out with something kind of snappy or catchy, you hope that that's the piece you can actually put on Facebook or YouTube or whatever. And it might be what goes viral, and maybe somebody will notice it, because you're fighting against this huge crush of information that everybody is absorbing in their everyday lives. And, the last stat I saw is that, the average Canadian consumes about 2 minutes a week of information regarding federal politics or issues that are at debate in Parliament. And during COVID, it's probably even less than that. And so, you see people working for that quick soundbite that might get noticed, and striving for relevance, I guess, amidst the environment that we're in. Right now, I think Canada is almost, even within our own borders and within our own cities and so forth, it almost seems like we're inundated with international news and international events, and the things that seem to be most exciting or stimulating to cover aren't necessarily what's going on in Toronto or Ottawa or any place in Canada. It seems to be everywhere else. But there's really important issues being debated in Parliament, and I think people are, the harder they have to fight for relevance within Canada, the more you're going to see those gotcha moments and those really snappy 10-second lines that sometimes, frankly, fall flat on their face. And you look at people and you think, wow, that was just kind of dumb, right? And often it's not reflective of that person either, right? But I understand what motivates it.
Going back to that 2006 campaign, I've had many politicians on the show. I asked this question because they always give a unique answer. You were one of potentially tens of 20,000 of Canadians who have been elected a member of Parliament in our Canadian history, probably less than 10,000, but you are one of them. Stepping on the House of Commons floor for the very first time. How daunting was that? And how did you take it in for a moment and say, I'm here and now I'm going to be affecting the lives of Canadians from coast to coast to coast?
Yeah. So I remember it well the first time I walked out onto the floor of the House, walked past the curtains onto the floor of the House of Commons. And it was, it was a tremendous honor. I didn't have to walk too far past the curtains because my seat was right against the curtains. It starts out that way for a lot of people. But I just remember being in there and thinking, I think I was one of, at the time, about 4,500 people, or give or take, that had ever been elected to the House of Commons. Coming from the background I came from, which was poor farm kid, the first person in my family to ever graduate from university, and knowing the adversity that my family had gone through, my dad's family, which was an immigrant family, and so forth, and seeing the adversity and so forth that we had gone through to get to that point, it was a significant thing, and it wasn't lost upon me. And I felt I really wanted to, it wasn't enough for me to be a part of the government. And maybe that was one of my frustrations in federal government. I came from small business, and I had been making decisions, that directly impacted on the direction of that small business for years. I then became part of this enormous operation, which is Government of Canada, and had, ideas, constant ideas and concepts and initiatives that I wanted to see undertaken, and had to find a way to fit that within a party structure, within a government context, whereby you realize government is it's like this giant ship, giant ocean liner going across the ocean and, at full speed, and it has a direction. And if you want to change the course of that ship, it takes forever. And that's the reality of government. It's not nimble. It doesn't move at the speed of business. It's almost always reactionary. And for somebody that's kind of very much, always looking for, a response, a corresponding response to a decision, that's an adjustment. But I remember I was just so full of drive, because I wanted so badly to really, see significant things happen and to be a change agent, not just for Peterborough, but for Canada. And, to the extent that I think in the end, I was successful in that. And I found a way to drive results, and I found a way to punch above my weight and the riding's weight nationally. I think I was successful at that, but that really was what dominated me when I went into the House of Commons, which was, it was an incredible honor. And at the same time, I just wanted to get going, right? I just looked at it and thought, let's get some stuff done. I've been given this opportunity. That was a minority parliament. Lord knows if I ever win again, but I'm going to leave my mark. And that was really kind of how I saw it.
You were elected twice more after that 2006 election, 2008 and 2011. In 2011, then the Conservatives won a majority government. The Prime Minister of the time, Prime Minister Stephen Harper, named you parliamentary assistant to the Prime Minister. I'm not sure if it was right after the election or a few months after the election, but how was that call? How was that moment of getting that call to say, hey, we need you to defend us in this majority government?
Yeah. So it kind of started, like the whole idea of defending the government started in 2007 with the Mulrooney-Schreiber affair. And I was sitting on that committee. I got dragged in during the summer, and we had the in and out issue before that. I got dragged into that. I was kind of a person that was seen as someone that could take on these challenges and not get rattled by them. And I've always been able to go, and I think, again, this comes from coming from a big family with a lot of political ideas. Debating was a skill that I probably had from the age of 8. And I was kind of unflappable. So I got put into these positions of representing the government. And I was doing a lot of nightly panels even back in 2007. Between 2007 and 2013, I think I had done almost 3 times as many media appearances as the next closest person in government. And I was named parliamentary secretary to the Minister of Canadian Heritage, James Moore, after the 2008 election. And the Minister for Sport, who was Gary Lunn, which was fantastic because we did all the work for the 2010 Olympics through those departments. And made a significant amount of investments, whether that was into national museums and historic sites and so forth. And, I was really proud of those things. And then after the 2011 election, I was rumored by a lot of corners that I was going to be nominated to cabinet. And you kind of sit there and wait for the phone to ring because you don't know, and that maybe you're under consideration. And at the same time, you have to be realistic that the way that cabinet is picked is not necessarily, as I said, they don't necessarily start with the people that are. I think the Prime Minister starts with the people that they must have in cabinet, right? The people that can handle the big portfolios, that have that experience. And in our government, it started with Jim Flaherty. Period. Yeah. He was our finance minister. He was the best minister in government. And he was, if there was one person that, I would want to emulate, whether it's in politics or in life, Jim Flaherty, because I just loved the guy. And he was a really good friend of mine. And, I had to be realistic about the fact that Jim was from half an hour away, right? And, there's other parts of the country that need to be represented in cabinet. And so I didn't get that call. And I remember I was actually at Queen's Park, which is not a place I go to or hadn't been to a lot. And it was a kind of a festive day. It was like media day. And I went and I was actually, Dalton McGuinty was speaking. It was this all-party celebration and so forth. Things were kind of winding down in Queen's Park they were about to go on summer recess, and my phone rings. And I answered the phone, kind of stepped aside and answered the phone, and it said, "Stand by, you've got a call from the Prime Minister." And I thought, oh, I better walk out the door here, so I walked out into this courtyard, and it was University of Toronto, and it was Stephen on the phone, and he said, we've been going back and forth and looking at, what might be the best position for you. You've done a good job, on panels and so forth and representing the government. And you've got a really good grasp on all aspects of government. And, when we were trying to decide exactly what portfolio you'd fit best into, I kind of decided that I thought you should be my parliamentary secretary. And wow. It was a great honor. And I was excited about it. And at the same time, I also knew that with that comes a tremendous amount of expectation and baggage and focus. And, and ultimately it led to me being in a position where I was the one defending the robocall challenge, which and some of the Senate issues, Senate expenditures. I didn't get the opportunity to cut a lot of ribbons and stand with big checks, which is the easy stuff in government. I got kind of handed this stuff where it was like, here, this is kind of a smoldering bag that doesn't smell very well, and you deal with this one. And it takes a toll on you after a while, because you become the face of those things, and that's not what you want. But it didn't change the fact that it was just a tremendous honor. I got to work with incredible people in the Prime Minister's office. I met with foreign governments and representatives of foreign governments regularly. I often screened meetings before people would meet with, whether it was Nigel Wright, who was Chief of Staff at the time, or the Prime Minister directly. They would offer meetings with me first, and members of PMO. And, it was really, as I often said to people, I was really on the tip of the spear, right? I was the first point of contact for so many things. And it was a really tremendous experience.
One more question I have to ask before we move into the next subject here. You mentioned Jim Flaherty. His loss was huge to Canada. Do you remember the day you got I'm assuming you remember the day. What was the first initial reaction that you heard or you had?
I was just stunned. I had met Jim in Florida a couple of months before that, and we had gone out. We went and saw a hockey game with his son and John and myself, and we actually met up with a great guy from Peterborough who happens to play in the NHL, or did at the time, named Mike Fisher, and it was, we were really, aside from politics, we were really good friends. And Jim was a guy that I think if you asked, in our first 06 Parliament, we had 126 MPs. And I think every one of them would say that they were, of everybody in cabinet, they were probably closest to Jim Flaherty. He just had this ability to be friends with so many people. And he was likable even across the aisle. People didn't agree with him, but they still liked him. And I think that was, it was a really kind of transcending ability that he had to both sell himself and the party and to be that friend and to be that guy and that mentor. And there was nobody in politics that I wanted to be like more than Jim. And he gave me great opportunities. I got to work directly with him on so many things. And Derek Van Stone, who was his chief of staff at the time, used to say to people, don't talk to Jim. If you want something in a budget, go talk to Del Mastro. He's the only guy Jim seems to listen to. And, it was a tremendous comment. It was a joke, but it was a tremendous compliment, right? And when I got the news, Jim had been not well for a while, and we didn't really know a lot about it. Jim was very private on that, but he was a guy that, was really into keeping himself fit and healthy and well. And, he did a lot of exercise, and, he was a tremendous hockey player when he was younger, and played NCAA hockey, and he was just a tremendous athlete. Despite his diminutive size, he was, he was really a tremendous sports talent. I think I remember going into caucus one day and being asked, by the media going in, what is wrong with Jim Flaherty? Because it was obvious, that he was, he was battling something. And I went to him and I said, Jim, I'm happy to take these questions and push people off, but I'm being really depressed about, what is, if you're going to make a statement or what might be going on. And Jim went out and told him that he was on prednisone and, that he was battling a blister problem and so forth at the time. And, I think I think everybody expected that Jim, he had announced that he was retiring. He had stepped back from being finance minister. I was joking with him that they were going to pick him up from Parliament in a Brinks truck because he was going to make so much money in the private sector. And, I think that, everybody expected that he would have this great retirement, and that when he was able to walk away from the stress that he had been carrying, because guiding Canada through some of those things and those budgets and minority politics, it weighs on people. It ages people. It aged Stephen Harper, right? Who was a younger man than Jim when we were elected. I think we anticipated that he would have this long retirement. When I got that news, it was devastating. And I remember, James Rajad, who was my roommate in Ottawa, we talked to Jim every day. We saw him often, and I remember the two of us just, having this conversation where it was, we were in disbelief, right? It just didn't seem real that this could happen.
The last set of questions I want to talk about now is politics, life after politics. How has it been?
Well, I mean, it's would be an understatement to say things didn't end the way that I intended them to. I think I saw the very worst side of politics. I think I saw, what I was subjected to over what was really an accounting dispute with Elections Canada. And it is an accounting dispute. And I'll go down my last breath maintaining that not only did I do nothing wrong, but I was absolutely correct in how we dealt with things. The whole idea that somebody that's never broken a law, that's never, that's only ever sought to be part of the solution would be, put into shackles over a check that they wrote to themselves using their own money and a few $1,000. It never even occurred to me that was a possibility that would happen. But I think it really was an extension of the partisan divide and ideologies, kind of the nastiness that exists in politics today. I remember, when I had to, so I got the verdict on the 31st of October, and we were just stunned with that. I remember, my wife and I, we were so convinced we'd won that case. We were planning a celebration after the verdict because we were convinced we'd won. And even, I had been called by the local newspaper and, They indicated, their editorial department, every person in their editorial department felt we had won the case. Right? And they told me that, and they asked me kind of what I was thinking going into the verdict and kind of what I was hoping for moving forward. I had, this list of things that I was really looking forward to working on. And, within the course of a few hours, that had been completely upended. And then on November 2nd, my daughter was born. And this is our first and only child. And it just kind of changed my focus, right? It took me off of this horrible thing that had just happened, kind of I guess I had gotten to the point where I almost identified myself as being, that's who I was. And I had to grapple with the idea that wasn't who I was going to be anymore. And I was now, but at the same time, I was given this incredible gift, which was to be Charlotte's dad, and for Kelly and I, my wife, to really focus on that next chapter of life. And it was kind of like, in many ways, as I've said to Kelly, that saved me, because it was such a difficult thing to go through. And I gave my final speech in Parliament. I don't know if you had an opportunity to watch it, but, one of the things that I said in that speech was, I talked about the seat, the actual physical seat. And I said, it's just a chair, but it embodies the hopes and dreams and visions and opportunities of everyone in this country. I've actually got that seat, I still feel that way. And, the transition back to the private sector from politics is difficult at the best of times. And I think for me, it was that much harder because I still had this fight. I went through a couple of appeals and, fighting because, I always wanted not just my family, not just for my family's name, but I really want my daughter to know that her dad's a good guy and I did good things. In so much as I may have been controversial from time to time, I stood my ground and fought for what I believed in and was rewarded with tremendous support in the community. I hope that my endearing legacy, and this is kind of what you get onto, and I'm not old, I just turned 50, and I hope to be around for a long time yet. But you do hope that your enduring legacy are the relationships you built, the things you got done, and the dreams you were able to impart onto others. I think I reflect on those things a lot. I've been, I was in business before I was into politics. I went back to business after. I found some success there. I continue to work toward success, and I have grand dreams and great expectations for myself. But politics is one of those things that I don't know that you ever get it out of your blood or out of your being. And I find myself, I can easily become consumed with news or events of a day, and I'll be sitting in conversations with groups of people, and I'll be thinking, they're talking about things that, that have nothing to do with the news. How can this be? Because I want to talk about, I want to talk about Keystone, and they want to talk to me, and they want to talk about when our school's going back in. And, I think these are all important issues, but, I use that only as an example of saying, that, I'm very much still still into politics. I'm really, I really feel that the decisions, whether they're made at a municipal or a provincial or a federal level, impact on our lives every day in every possible way you can comprehend. And, I still find myself trying to impress upon people how important these things are. It still is something that, is a big part of who I am.
So I got to ask one last question with that last statement you just said. If your daughter comes to you at the age of 18 and says, I want to run for politics, what's the first advice you're going to give her?
Well, the first thing I would ask her is, why do you want to run? I remember, if you don't have an answer for that question, you should never run. And it should never be about you. And it better be about something that in my view anyway, it better be about something that's much bigger than self. And you should have it figured out long before you ever run. And if you don't have that issue, if you don't have that, whatever it is, belief that's driving you to run, then you shouldn't do it. I'd say that to anyone. I've got people that come to me all the time. I want to run for municipal. I want to run for councillor. I want to run. I'm thinking about seeking the party nomination for X or what have you. And I went through this at the last federal election, or the last conservative leadership campaign, whereby I had people calling me and asking me what I thought of them running for leader, or this person running for leader, or who I thought, I might support or people might get behind. And, I advised a couple of people, I said, do not run. Don't do it. Because, one, it's going to take a lot out of you. And two, why do something like, I don't really believe in doing things for profile, right? And sometimes people run for leadership for profile. I really think it's important that, if you're going to run, if you're going to do anything in politics, do it to win, right? Even if you ultimately lose the election, don't put a half-hearted effort in, don't go halfway. And I think, if my daughter came to me and said, I'm going to run for office, I'd say, okay, we need a plan to win, because you're not going to give that much of yourself, and you're not going to take that much abuse on, not to win. And secondly, you've really got to have it well defined what is driving you. Because if you don't have this kind of pure purpose and a sense of purpose as to why you're running and why you and not somebody else, then I just don't think it's something you should get into, because it is it's not glamorous it's incredibly rewarding. It's the honor, it's the professional honor of my life. The greatest honor of my life was my wife saying, agreeing to marry me. And the second greatest honor, the professional honor, was being elected to politics by my peers here in my hometown, in my home community. But with it comes tremendous responsibility, and you put your life under a microscope, and you'll never go back to being that person that you were before. Your reputation and kind of who you are, and that's permanently changed. And you kind of see the world differently when you get to the other side of it. You don't just go back to, some bridges get severed, and not for just because you're busy and you get into different. It's so encompassing that other people move on with their lives. Other things, life continues when you're not there, and you don't get to go back and resume things where they were. You come to a different point and you restart from there. So you have to be realistic about, how this changes who you are, what you are, and what you do moving forward. And I think people going into it need to be mindful of that. Certainly I can say for business, and if you're in small business, and I had a friend of mine who ran provincially, who had been in business in Peterborough, that came to me when I first announced that I was going to run. And he said, the impact on your business will all be bad. None of it will be good. He said, you think it's going to help you? He said, but it doesn't. And what I could say is we did, in my family and so forth, did experience that challenge of having somebody in office, right? Whereby they were almost by extension responsible for things that votes that were being had or positions of the government, and they had no influence over it, right? But it does impact on other people. So anybody that's running, whether it's advice to my daughter or advice to anybody else, it's a yes, if you feel a passion for it, and you feel it's something you need to do, then you should absolutely do it. One of the things that always bothers me, whether it's in federal politics, provincial politics, municipal politics, is people running because they need a job. And the first thing I'll look at people and say, you know what, it's not that kind of a profession, right? It's not something you do because you don't know what else to do with your life. It's something you do because you feel you have something to give to it. And you know, I think that's really what should drive people to go into public office, because it can be tremendously rewarding, but it can also be tremendously taxing, and you'll never quite be, you'll never go back to what you were before that, right?
Yeah. Dean, I want to thank you so much for this. This has been enlightening, and I appreciate you taking your time out of your day and sitting down and chatting with me today.
Yeah, I like I see some of the vintage campaign stuff behind you there. I think that's a tremendous little collection you've got going on there, campaign button. But I may send me your address. I'll fire one off to you, so you got one in the background.
I was about to say, because we just had to buy a third one because we've gotten too much. So yes, I will do that.
Thank you once again for listening to the Cross Border Interview Podcast. If you love this episode of the Cross Border Interview Podcast, head over to iTunes or wherever you get your podcast and subscribe, rate us, and leave us a review. All the links to our social media accounts are in the show notes, or visit www.crossborderinterviews.ca. The Cross Border Interview Podcast was produced and edited by Miranda Brown & Associates Incorporated. Be sure to tune in for our next episode of the Cross Border Interview Podcast. Once again, thank you. Bye-bye.